les Américains se trompent en croyant qu'en bombardant le Nord, il pourra gagner la guerre dans le Sud. Jamais, jamais, ils gagneront cette guerre. Jamais, jamais, nous submettrons. Parce que notre guerre, c'est une guerre patriotique, c'est une guerre juste, et nous sommes décidés à lutter, que ce soit 5 ans, 10 ans, 20 ans ou davantage, nous gagnerons.
Politics, Ideas and Profile is a book written by David Runciman on the eponymous topic of politics. Published in 2014 as part of the series Profile, Small Introduction to Big Topics, politics is, among many things, an excellent read and a masterclass on creating literary works that are short and sweet. As Runciman takes you across history and showcases with excellent diction and masterful language the ideas that constitute politics both modern and traditional, I believe you would share my sentiment when I say that politics is actually quite interesting. Together, let us analyze the ideas presented by Runciman, politics in relation to violence, technology and justice, and how that ties in to the future of my generation. Just to preface, before you go any further, do not be fooled by the title of politics. The book isn't there to serve a political agenda, because it was not written by a politician. David Runciman was a political scientist who aims, with this book, to provide an approachable introduction to politics to a wider audience. What he aims to complete with this concise piece of work is to observe politics under an intellectual standpoint, and to give you an understanding of what constitutes politics and the differences between politics around the world. The book begins by drawing a rather bleak comparison between Syria and Denmark. One is a seeming utopian society, while the other is, well, quite the opposite. The difference of these two nations, as David Runciman believes, lies in its political structure, or how these nations are governed. And no, this isn't a straightforward claim that politics is the defining make or break of a nation. The point that David is trying to drive forward is that good or bad politics serves to either moderate or amplify the bad and the good of a nation. And that the most prosperous societies do not differ so much to the other nations fundamentally. See, back in the day, Denmark used to be very similar to modern-day Syria, and Syria used to be very similar to modern-day Denmark. The roles were reversed. Back when Denmark was hell, Syria was heaven. The differences in this transition is, as David Runciman believes, firstly a symptom and also a consequence of political change. Good politics brings about change, yes, but good change brings about good politics all the same. What this caused me to ponder was, if the differences in political governing was so vast that it could create a gap as big as heaven and hell, why couldn't we have just copied the system of Denmark and make it work for Syria? Although David attributes this to a question of many facets by saying there are obvious practical difficulties, I believe it is simply just a matter of obstination. People are naturally opposed to change, and flipping an entire political system on its head to follow another polity's methods would be the same as acknowledging fault and inferiority. After having established his purpose for the book, David proceeds under the major guise of violence, our first main topic. At its core, politics is about governing, regulating violence, and acquiring power, which also includes a safekeeping aspect. Moreover, politics itself can be quite complicated. It could be seen as a form of violence, including the application of necessary pressure for people to reach a consensus. This connection highlights the coercive aspect of politics in terms of trying to get people to understand to a central government, therefore making them easier to politically control. Which honestly piqued my interest, and let me tell you why. If everything is just as David says, and politics represents a complex interplay between consensus building and coercion, that is, trying to reach a point of consensus wherein everybody agrees by making the people who refuse to agree with force. But when there is no argument and there is only separation between countries like Denmark and Syria, it seems that politics does more harm than good in trying to alleviate the difficulties and the problems that involve minimizing segregation within these nations. This means that politics, at its worst, wouldn't mean controlling violence for the sake of the people, but stifling it and exacerbating another more deep-rooted issue in its stead. This will create a zero-sum game wherein nobody wins, and the only people who lose are those at the bottom rung of the ladder suffering. The book also delves into the roles of the state, or the top central government governing the people, and politicians in shaping and preserving society. Here, David Runciman draws on the idea of past thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli and, more prominently, Mr. Thomas Hobbes. First, Hobbes' Leviathan model proposes a different solution by advocating for a strong central leader is discussed in the context of several distrust and absence of common goals. What really struck me as interesting in this part was an idea of Hobbes that, I quote, proposes that the point of Hobbes' experiment was to get his readers to accept that any form of political rule is better than the alternative, that being chaos. That was what I've cited from the book. And my belief is this. The way that Hobbes thinks in this specific situation is that instead of trying to get people to choose a leader by democratic voting for one leader or another of a different political party, Hobbes is trying to propose a simpler dilemma by making people choose between politics and no politics at all. And in Hobbes' opinion, he believes that not having a central figure would lead to disaster and unbridled chaos. And despite the faults and the wrongs of a political party, if they are the only option you have, then they should be the only option you choose. On the topic of freedom, the evolution of politics is also highlighted within the book, particularly about individual freedom. While peace has become a norm, the role of politics has expanded to safeguard individual liberties of people. This raises questions about the extent to which politics should protect an individual's rights and the balance between freedom and society, because Hobbes also defined, and Machiavelli agrees, that people, when left to their own devices to do whatever they want, can be very chaotic and naturally competitive, brutally so. His perspective on the preservation of power and use of force is explored. Modern politics, however, goes beyond Machiavelli, with democrats legitimizing certain forms of violence in specific circumstances, creating what Runciman terms an accepted monopoly of violence by the state. Here, I'd like to just weigh in a little. My love for the thought hierarchy of Niccolò Machiavelli, coupled with my experiences with seeing corrupt politicians on the news, made one thing in the book especially gripping for me, that being the dilemma of dirty hands. At this point, the book concluded by virtue of Hobbes' beliefs that a kingless society is terrible in many ways more than one. And again, a leading figure is always necessary in any society. But Machiavelli sows the seed of doubt in our politicians by questioning how difficult it is to be morally upstanding and forthright when you're in possession of such great power. And he gives many reasons for this possibility, from the necessity of staying vigilant for upcoming threats to the essential significance of fear. To follow this up, David Runciman also includes a very interesting idea that I find to be deeply intriguing: the perils of peace. As Machiavelli claims, having stable political states is also just as dangerous for the people as it is for the state. Because with everyone nice and forthright, who is it that will bear arms and take matters into their own hand to preserve the rights of the individual, everyday people by getting blood on their dirty hands? This brings me to the second part of the book, the best part in my opinion, namely the technology revolution. The theme of the relationship between politics and technology in David Runciman's book is a compelling and timely exploration, particularly given the limited literature on the impact of technological change on political states. Runciman begins by highlighting the political revolution of recent decades, such as the Arab Spring, and then delves in the potential for a more significant political revolution driven by technological progress. He argues that technology has the potential to render traditional politics useless. primarily due to the rapid pace of technological change that makes governments appear slow and often irrelevant. This insight is especially relevant in an era where technology's influence on society is increasingly evident, and it's all the more important for a tech student such as myself. Although Runciman also claims that technological development cannot escape the boundaries of traditional political control because of the necessity for building physical infrastructure and sanctioning and allowing these technological development and advances to access resources of the modern world like data and testing by the people. The author also highlights how firms have become influential enough that politicians have to address their roles in shaping our societies. This is evident when companies are affecting people more and more, especially my generation, like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I could confidently say that what goes on to these platforms can figure prominently into how the younger generation thinks and believes and their outlook upon the world. And again, as a student in tech, I believe this is exciting to say the least in the comparison between democracy versus technocracy within this part. Wherein technology experts might replace the traditional politicians, this discussion considers the impact of the professionalization of politics, where elections and re-elections become a career, leading to a lack of real-world experience among politicians. The author raises thought-provoking questions about how politics would change if politicians possessed more technological knowledge and the potential consequences of the political class. Again, one more, as a future technological expert,
this does put a smile on my face.
Overall, despite all these flaws and faults, politics is well-meaning, and at the end of the day, its goal is to create justice. Right? In their widely acclaimed 2012 book, Why Nations Fail, political economists Darren Klimoglu and James Robertson sought to elucidate the fundamental distinction between effective and ineffective politics. Their explanation here is straightforward, emphasizing that politics succeeds when it is inclusive, meaning those in power make the decisions that are best for those under them. And it fails miserably when politics is considered to be extractive, when the people at the top make the decisions to benefit the people at the top. They also stress that their analysis is not predetermined by factors like climate, geography, culture, or region. It is simply a comparison between the pure political construct of these nations together. They aim to demonstrate that a nation's prosperity is never fated to be unachievable. These two also draw a comparison between North and South Korea, where the countries are significantly similar but also entirely different in terms of how they're governed and the successes that they've achieved in the global state. The divergent political trajectories in the 1953 have resulted in one becoming one of the most wealthy countries in Asia, while the other becoming the poorest. The impact of inclusive politics could not be more evident. Akimogu and Robinson argues for a form of justice rooted in Republican principles, which necessitate an active approach of people to rectifying imbalance and inequalities within society by advocating for neutral politics based on fairness.
David Runciman's book, although named Politics, is not one that only advises us on how to govern a country. It also tells us how to conduct ourselves in a more everyday manner. As members of the generation undergoing technological change as rapid as it is, we need to understand the importance of technological inclusivity and how to treat the people around us in order to create an orderly society. The future of our generation and how it's going to be governed would most likely follow a variation of the Niccolo Machiavelli system of belief, where violence is controlled, regulated. We can already see more and more conflicts going on in the world, and the book helps us to understand the nature of these conflicts and how we, as individual members of this generation, could try and rectify the wrongdoings, if there are any, of modern society and politics.